Women's health. Great topic. At DBC, we know hormones rule. They do. And about 26, 27 years ago, I still remember sitting in class, brilliant professor, teaching obstetrics and gynecology. And this professor comes out with a statement, and he just said it casually, and by the way, when patients come in complaining of PMS, doesn't exist. It's just a form of depression. Should be treated with antidepressants. And then he went on to the next topic, and I'm going, but. I'm the youngest kid. I grew up with only sisters. I knew PMS exists, without a doubt, and that was my rude introduction into the difference between science and opinion. Because even the most brilliant scientist, and this professor to this day I hold in a lot of respect, knows an incredible amount, but on some things, obviously, it was very biased. And I want you to know that bias is very alive and clear today, and not nearly enough attention has been paid to women's health issues. We're going to try to correct that today. And this is a fascinating, this is just a fascinating journey. It has no end. We're just obviously very much scratching the surface. We hope to continue next time. I told my wife that over lunch, and she says, "What? How about all the guys?" I says, "Believe me, this is helping the guys a lot." And not only that, I'm going to include some of the guys a little bit more next time also. So we're going to have a lot of fun with this. So we're going to cover pregnancy, menopause, hormonal methylation, the female athlete, and our December seminar. I want you to make you aware of the resources that we have. Because at DBC we do functional medicine, and that includes lifestyle changes. And with lifestyle changes, it means creating partnership with our patients, our health coaches, our staff, and really creating a group so that we can go on together. So we've created a lot of resources for you to research. You'll see some fascinating handouts that we use, and it's really grown leaps and bounds, literally weekly. We also have media pages where we do Facebook and Twitter. If you hit the YouTube button there, you'll see this seminar there by the middle of next week. So you say, you know, I want to study a slide a little more closely. It'll be on there, and you'll notice that this thing is really it's taken off like mad. For instance, our gluten seminar that you saw just last Wednesday, or when did we do that one? June. It should hit about 20,000 viewers just within this month. So it's amazing how that's taken off. And one of our new patients this morning, we always say on there who referred you, because I always want to say thank you to whoever referred, because it is a compliment every time. This was a first. She says YouTube referred. So, okay. Yeah. Came in from Massachusetts. Yeah. So, then there's our blog every week. Like next week you'll see, or might even be this week, I wrote an article on the flu vaccine, and I've referenced it on all the medical articles that have been published in top tier medical journals regarding the flu vaccine just this year alone, and all the evidence that goes against it, and how we're still pushing forward with that anyways. So that's in the blog. So take advantage of that stuff. It's fun. The cooking class that was just mentioned by Don, that's going to be a journey into a plethora of tastes. So if you want to titillate your taste buds, that's when we do. Spaces are running out. We always sell out, and there's always a waiting list. So if you want to hit that one, make sure you get on that, and prepare to be wowed by our service and food and information. Okay. So hormones. Hormones rule, and I meant that literally. It involves every single body aspect. I was looking at a patient today who comes in with thyroid issues, very hormonal, and constipation, hair falling out. And she was frustrated. She says, look, this hair, I used to have a ponytail this big, and now it was just down to a tiny ponytail. Going through menopause, so a lot of menopausal symptoms, which was stressing her adrenals and thyroid. And so, and you looked at her skin, and it was all of a sudden starting to look older. And she's very much in good shape, and so she was very distressed about this. So it was starting to affect her detoxification pathways. It's obviously had affected her reproductive system. Her immune system was down because her hormones are one of the prime motivators of that. Her moods were obviously in the dumpster, even cardiovascularly, she's at much greater risk right now, because as soon as you become hormonally imbalanced, stroke and cardiovascular risk just goes through the roof. She was very inflamed. In fact, almost felt like a fibromyalgia patient today. She was hard to work on. So musculoskeletal system is affected. And we all see in perimenopausal, menopausal, thyroid patients, adrenal patients, more urinary tract infections because of the changes of those tissues. The gut is absolutely huge. It controls a lot of our hormones. In fact, and I'll show you that with some biochemistry in a little bit, how someone's hot flashes can be alleviated with just adding fiber in a diet. And that is absolutely amazing how easy and simple it really is. But when you study the complexities of what's really happening, it's absolutely fascinating. So everything is affected by everything, and that's why I think it's almost foolish to just focus on one thing and try to hijack a woman's hormones with hormone replacement therapy and expect it to have good outcome. It does not. It has profound negative outcomes. The risk factors go up through the roof, and it sets you up for a second chapter of life that is not at all pleasant. So we're going to start by giving you lots of information with pregnancy resources. This is the pregnancy is a profound topic. You are really affecting generations behind you, the ones that you'll never ever meet. So pay attention to this one. I think it's a huge topic.
Thanks. My name is Dr. Stacy, for those of you who do not know me. I set out to conquer a very big section of the seminar, and I really don't have enough time to cover this as much as I want to, so we're going to really be skimming the surface. I chose to start out with my resources page. I promise that we will get this somewhere on our website under our resources so you can have these. These are just different books and information that I find is very interesting, very helpful for any of my pregnant moms, because the questions that I constantly get in the rooms, what about this? What do I do with this? Now, I don't have really any of the stuff put down here I do recommend yoga for a lot of ladies while they're pregnant. I recommend midwives if they want to use a midwife. I really think that's something that not a lot of people really think about, because we are so medically oriented that we forget about just the natural way of childbirth has, for many, many, many years, been through midwives. Back in the 1900s, midwives were so common that 95% of births were done at home. In 1938, half of those births were done at home because we had started to specialize. So we had more OB-GYNs out there. In 1955, less than 1% are done at home. And that trend still continues today. So we've really struggled to bring into what is the natural birth and a very lovely process, and we make it into absolutely scary and terror for most women. Because how many people see on TV that it's a natural, happy process? All you hear is them screaming and wanting to be out of there. And it's really not a lot of what patients will say. The one thing that I didn't get on here, which I apologize, we do have a wonderful DVD that I do have available for patients that I allow them to check out. If you're pregnant, it's a must watch. If you're ever thinking about kids, this is a must watch. It's called The Business of Being Born. It was done by Ricki Lake. Most people know Ricki Lake if you've been around for a while. She actually, I believe, has another talk show out, but it's wonderful that talks about just different experiences through women. You do see live births on here. So I do have to tell everybody, if you watch it, there are live births. The last one is a cesarean, so you'll get to see a little bit of everything. You'll get to walk through what a woman goes through. They talk about the goods and the bads in the hospital and why things have changed so much. So there's really a lot of information that could be had here. Pre-pregnancy was something that I also was going to touch on tonight. Basically, from the time that we start cycling or menstruating is the time that our body is preparing for children. We are always prepping and building our bodies to build up the nutrient resources to have children. Now, most people don't think about that until the day they find out they're pregnant. Oh my goodness, I've got to start planning now. We're so excited. Well, the time to prep your body for pregnancy is at least 6 months to a year beforehand to get the nutrient values up to where your body needs to be to support. So then it also doesn't take away all of your life forms that keep you going. That's where women start to get depletion of energy, they'll run into depression. All of those things can come about if we don't have enough nutrients within our system. So really it's 6 months to a year. And at that point, on top of it, and Dr. Kate will touch a little bit on this, really that monthly cycle is a time to check in to see how well you're doing. If you have really, really rough cycles and you have a lot of symptomatology, PMS, by the way, has over 300 symptoms associated with it. It's basically now a coverall for everything. So, I mean, if you have a lot of symptoms that push you into those categories, it's a good thing to say, hey, I may have a rough pregnancy. I may have a rough delivery. So thinking about that 6 months to a year before you want to get pregnant or you want to start your family, that's also the time you need to start exercising and working on how do we deal with stress, because everybody has said that kids do not run on a timetable. So, little do you know, you're not going to be able to time it either. Cesareans are on the rise. We'll talk a little bit about that. And really, when we're talking about childbirth, I went to the CDC website. I thought, okay, the CDC has a lot of good stats on there. Unfortunately, they're really poor when it comes to maternal deaths and fetal deaths. Basically, in 2008, and mind you, this is 5 years ago, but that was the most current that I could find on the website, the U.S. is ranked number 50 in the world for maternal mortality rates. That means 49 other countries are better at keeping their women alive than we are. We are one of the most diversified nations when it comes to our healthcare. We should be the best at this, but we are not. And mainly, there's a lot of things that show up. We push the pregnancies. We try to, really the hospital, it's about getting you in and getting you out. So if you're meant to have a longer childbirth because you're not all the way there, that's when they start to push things. And that shows it a lot, and that's why I love the business of being born. It actually walks you through what the doctors think on why they do it. And a lot of your OB-GYNs will tell you, hey, I'm actually studied in surgery, so that's my job. That's what I'm really good at. And not a lot of them on the, that you talk to have ever really seen a true live birth without any type of intervention. So that's something else that is crazy when you think about these kind of things. So as you see here, from 1987 to 2010, it's basically 12.7 deaths, and these are maternals. So these are moms that were lost during the delivery out of 100,000. Now, baby deaths were running about the same. Back when we first were talking about cesareans and other types, it used to be like midwives would say it'd be 1 in 187 where I'd have to deliver one, have to send them out for a cesarean, and we'd get them to the hospital so they could have that. And they said the next one would be about 312 on the delivery list where they'd have to have another cesarean. Now those numbers are pretty darn good. Right now we're averaging about 1 in 4 are going to have a cesarean. So not really the best numbers when we're thinking about it. And the other complaint that a lot of people will tell me is that the midwife is not covered by their insurance. So they question whether or not, that costs a lot less. Which one would we want to cover? We're not sure. So that was the other complaint that I get from patients, is why they wouldn't use a midwife, is because it's not covered. I understand. So things that create what they cause where we would need to do an interventional delivery. Glycemia, where you have a high glycemia within the pregnancy, what they call this gestational diabetes. So blood sugar imbalances. Now this is also very interesting because as you look back through research, if a woman has a higher body mass index, her baby is more likely to be large, which a larger baby is harder obviously to push out. Therefore, we're going to have more of an intervention within there. So that's why I point back to 6 months to a year. We want to start getting to where we would feel we're healthy and we're ready to have a child. That means exercise is in place, because most women also, when you're pregnant, they don't want to move. Things hurt. You get big. It's sore. We understand. But they really recommend before you start, you need to be walking 6 miles a day. That helps keep the pelvis in line. It loosens up the piriformis. It helps tighten the glutes so that things are in preparation for separation when the baby does come. Depression is also linked to low birth rates on top of that. So if we have somebody that has a low birth rate child, usually the mom has been depressed through the pregnancy. So whether she's been on medications or something else, that will lead to depletion of nutrients for baby, so baby will be a lower birth weight. So these are all, to me, are very important when I'm looking at somebody that tells me that they want to become pregnant, because fertility is an issue in this country. Infertility rates are rising. There's questionable as to what the cause is, but really a lot of it comes down to if we start to work on that health travel that we need to be on, can we help improve the fertility rate? Absolutely. Because a lot of it is just imbalance within the body as we're working. So on top of this, there's so much to think about when you want to have a child. I have so many people come in and they start at that point and then they wish they would have done something different. And really, there's only regret in the rearview mirror. You always have to look forward. So if you keep driving forward, that's all we can do. So basically, what we try to do in this office is prep those that need to be prepped. You know, I always tell every young lady that's in this office, so you know, my job, no matter what we're doing, is to prep you if you want to have children. Now, if you don't want to have children, that's awesome. But at least I'm going to help you have the best health status that you can have as a female. And for me, that also requires that, hey, your cycles are happy. They're not nightmare terrorish. I don't want to be around anybody for 2 or 3 days, or I just want to stay in bed because everything hurts, or I'm just hemorrhaging, nothing is working, that kind of thing. They should be one of those things that, hey, I have very few symptoms, they're very light, and boy, it's over before I knew it, and it showed up and I didn't really know it was coming. That's what I'm looking for. And when moms come in and they have daughters that have had all these symptomatology, you know, oh, she's crampy, she's moody, but all that's normal. I mean, every woman goes through that. And I'm like, I don't think so. It's not meant to be that way. Now, birth control pills have helped us to not be that way, but that doesn't mean that that's the solve in the long run. So when we're looking at cesarean, because this is one of the most common problems with pregnancy, and this is where I think women fall in love with the idea of being able to pick the baby's birth date as well. They talk a lot about VBAC, vaginal birth after cesarean. Very, very doable. There's a lot of women who can do it. Really, when you discuss pregnancy and we look at how delivery happens, the position that they put a female in, that does not help for contractions. That does not help deliver a baby. Women are meant to be upright or slightly tilted back, not flat on her back with her legs up. That really doesn't allow you to use your abdominal muscles the way that you need to deliver a child purposefully. So these scare me because they've gone up so much in the last 10 years alone. We're getting such big cesarean rates. In 1996, which doesn't seem that long ago now, the cesarean rate in Michigan was 20.7% of births. We had a cesarean C-section. In 2011, we've already raised 12%. If this keeps going, we'll be up to 45% within another 10 years. That'll be almost half the births that we have in this country. Now, what I really love about the business of being born that Ricki Lake talks about, she says, you know, the hardest thing about a cesarean when it's planned, and it takes away the whole event of the childbirth. You don't remember what happened because there's medications involved. She says, so it takes away the whole joy of being able to see your baby born because, number one, there's a curtain. And most of the time, they're out or they're alive, you know, you're awake, but you don't really know what's going on. So that takes away also that bonding time. The one big thing that happens when a woman has a vaginal birth is the fact that she gets to bond with her baby. It's not meant to be this crazy, scary time where, oh my gosh, we gotta get the baby out, we gotta wipe it off, we gotta, whoa, and all that. That's not really what it's meant to be. Christiane Northrup, we had the privilege of listening to her at our last seminar. She's a very renowned author. She talks a lot about her latest book, I believe was Women's Wisdom in Their Bodies. The last one was The Wisdom of Menopause. She also has books out about how to talk to your teenagers about their cycles. She was funny because she's an OB-GYN on top of it. And she says, you know, everything is always an emergency. When women have a baby, it's an emergency. We gotta get in there, we gotta get the baby out. And we gotta clamp the cord, we gotta do this, we gotta do that. And she says, really, it's supposed to be one of the most relaxing times that a woman goes through. She says, I should be in there and I'm telling them, you have the perfect pelvis for this. You can do this. We're gonna deliver this baby. Your pelvis is gonna separate, the baby's gonna come right through, and it's just gonna be great. So I always loved her and listening to her because really, coming from an OB-GYN who delivers babies all the time, I thought, you know, that really is true. Every birthing room that I've ever been in with all of my friends, my heart rate was up. I swear I had high blood pressure and I was scared. I didn't know what was going on. And I wasn't even the one having the baby. I'm like, it's no wonder what you're thinking. So, you know, stress is a big part of this component. Pregnancy is one of the hardest things because you also pre-program your child. The entire time that you're pregnant, everything that happens to you happens to your child. If you have a lot of stress, you're pre-programming your child to have more adrenal cortex hormones within their system, which means that they may have a harder time dealing with stressful situations. They may have emotional outbursts that we don't understand why, and that's because of what's being programmed. So the next time you see a pregnant lady, go out of your way and ask her if she needs help. Carry something for her, because we used to have this village mentality that it took an entire village to raise a child. Now we're all so separate, we all have our own homes, we're all moved away, that we don't have that village mentality anymore. So these women a lot of them feel alone in raising their children, and that's one of the things that we've got to work towards is how do we make it easier on those that are having babies so that we can make that child's life even better for later on. So then we can prevent a lot of this, because if she has a nice relaxing pregnancy, she's eating well, she's exercising, a lot of these don't become complications. I have a lot of patients who walk in and say, yeah, I was in labor for 4 hours. I'm like, wow, did you make it to the hospital? Barely. So, I mean, that kind of thing is lovely to hear when we're in the office. And a lot of those women are ones that have pre-planned and taken care of themselves. So really, my hope tonight is I'm only scratching the surface. There's so much I could go into. I could go into food that we need to do for pre-pregnancy. I could go into different exercise books that I'd love to do. I could also touch base on all of the, obviously moving for, could you do an organic? Because a lot of parents want to do organic living with their children, and how do I make an organic pregnancy? How do I make organic baby food? All that. I could touch on all that, but we just don't have the physical time tonight. So we'll work towards building more seminars on this. I know Dawn and I had put together some coaching classes for our pregnant ladies as well, because we feel that that's one area that we really haven't touched base on in our office very well. Basically we walk through, do you have 3 now?
We're working on 3, we have 1 complete and ready to go.
Okay, so our ideal is that we want to have 1 for each trimester, and then in the long run we want to have 1 before the pregnancy, so we know what type of nutrients you need. When do you need to up your fish oil, because fish oil needs to be increased at certain amounts of the trimesters. How many calories do we need to be intaking? What's our balance of food? If we have food sensitivities, how do we get all those nutrients in so the baby gets what they need? And what's the difference between prenatals, because that's always a big one. I don't have time to discuss all that, so those are really tough things that we also need to add into the whole mix. So basically, I chose to really hit things that I feel are becoming more intervention and problematic for ladies in the long run. I mean, really, we're having an obesity rate in this world, and unfortunately that's also going to make, if we have a higher BMI when we get pregnant, we are going to be struggling with actually having a natural birth. It's not going to happen because the baby will more than likely be too large, and that'll be too tough for mom to push out. That's one of the reasons as you look, we have more and more heavier weight babies. Back 30, 40 years ago, 8-pound babies were kind of large for a lot of people. So the cesarean delivery rates, this one shocks me every time I bring it out. Over the last 10 years, really what they're saying here is that if you have an early term delivery for cesarean, that tends to happen more often than the late terms, obviously. Also, the other issue is taking a baby cesarean early, because a lot of people get to, if they've had a cesarean, they wanted their next baby is also already usually picked as a cesarean. We're not perfect on our timing of how far along you are. We can do pretty good, but we're not perfect. So really the mom's body should be telling you when to have the baby, when the contractions begin. If that's when you needed to have a cesarean, maybe that's when we should be thinking about, hey, we're just going to do an emergency cesarean instead of a planned one. Because a lot of women are having them 1 to 2 weeks early, which cuts back on development of your child as well. So all of those things for us are very important when you're looking at this. The other thing they had noticed on the cesarean births is that the electronic fetal monitoring, everybody's seen those. They get to watch the baby's heart rate, see how the baby's doing. Since that's been taken into effect, cesarean rates have gone up as well. So because we know what the baby's doing in there, we automatically assume we know better, so we're going to deliver because we feel that they're under a little bit of distress. Now yes, it has saved many lives, but is there sometimes where it's intervening at the wrong time? Absolutely, absolutely. But if you're looking for something, you'll find it. The more we look for stuff, we're going to find problems. So that's one of the things that they feel the cesarean rates have gone up for. With that, we'll kind of jump past everything after pregnancy and jump menopause, because everybody gets pregnant and then just goes into menopause. So, yes?
Do you want to just clarify, when you talked about how that women should walk a certain number of miles, can you just clarify?
6 is ideal, but if you haven't walked, they say to only start with a half mile and increase by a half mile every 1 to 2 weeks. And then it doesn't have to be done all at once. It can be done throughout the day. So if you get fatigued, go in between times.
So you're saying 6 miles per day?
Per day, 7 days a week.
That's a lot.
There you go.
Thanks. Okay, I get to talk about menopause. Is anyone feeling warm? Well, first we're going to start with just talking about what menopause is. I find that there's a lot of misconceptions surrounding menopause, actually even in menopausal women, interestingly. So a few definitions to start. What even is menopause? Well, here at DBC Functional Medicine, we look at menopause as a report card of your life. If Dr. Stacy mentioned PMS being a checkpoint along the way, okay, how are we doing? How are our cycles doing? If you have really severe symptoms, maybe that's okay, we've got a red flag here flying. Whereas menopause is kind of the culmination of all of those things. Raise your hand if you know a woman who sailed through menopause without hardly any symptoms. Right? We know those women. Some of us are jealous of those women. Okay. How many of you know women who wake up multiple times in the night with hot flashes, can't get a good night's sleep, just horrible menopausal symptoms? Okay. So we've got a wide spectrum of what menopause looks like in different populations. So it can't just be one thing. It can't be that simple. It can't be that easy. It's not just my ovaries are done. I'm no longer going to get pregnant, bada bing, bada boom, that's it. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about the complexity of menopause. Interesting, menopause by definition is 12 months after your last period. So it's a deadline, and that is menopause. 12 months after your last period, you're done. Well, a lot of women go 11 months and then have a period. Shoot. I thought I was in menopause. What is wrong here? So then I get a little bit, another 6 months, 7 months, another period. Okay, it happens a lot to a lot of women. That is called perimenopause. That happens anywhere from 2 to 5, some people even 10 years before actual menopause, before actual cessation of menstruation. And a lot of women experience most of their symptoms during that period of time. Not actually at that end point. It's during the period of time where the body is slowly changing. Ovaries are producing different hormones at different rates, and a lot of different interplays in that area. So when we talk about menopause, usually when women say I'm menopausal, they mean perimenopausal. So I'm going to use perimenopausal as best that I can because I feel like it's the correct term, but a lot of people use menopause and perimenopause interchangeably. So we already said hormones are the boss, right? Hormones rule. Well, in menopause and perimenopause, those hormone levels start to change. Granted, females, as they cycle, have changed what should be a very nice, easy, cyclical change of hormone levels anyway going throughout. So when those nice, easy, the menstrual cycles wind down, it should be a very calm, very easy change. However, most of us don't have nice, easy menstrual cycles. It's spike and dive and spike and dive and staying way, way, way too high for no good reason. And then when you hit menopause and things start to try to level out, it doesn't work. Okay? So we'll talk a little bit about some of those changes. A big part about why those changes occur is input. Everything, they don't just change because, okay? Our hormones change because of something we're putting in, whether it's nutrition, stress, exercise, everything encompassed in lifestyle. Those hormones are responding, okay? They're not instigating change, they're responding to what you're putting in. So functionally, when we look at these things, it helps give us lots of options for how to normalize or level out some of those hormones. What hormones do we talk about? Estrogen, progesterone, but those aren't the only ones, okay? Cortisol. There's a lot of other mechanisms involved in that. Cortisol coming from the adrenals, that we're going to talk about that as well. Testosterone actually plays a big role. Luteinizing hormone. There's a bunch of different hormones that are weaving and winding, rising and lowering that go into all of these changes. Also, there's changes in the brain. Women's brains rewire. They actually have shown that women's brains will shrink for a period of time. Okay? Yeah. Some of you guys are going, yes, absolutely. Up to 10%. And then they recover, right, if given the right. But during that perimenopausal, menopausal shift, they are actively rewiring. It's not just your hormones, it's actual neurologic reprogramming of your body that can cause not only the physical side of things, but emotional, psychological changes that come along with this. One awesome stat that I saw, thanks to baby boomer generation, by 2025, World Health Organization says that 1.1 billion women will be going through menopause. Scary? Really awesome, okay? What's awesome about it is that when you get a population of that size, change can occur. We can change the way that we look at something like menopause because so many women are going to be going through it at the same time. So many women are going to be raising their hand and saying, you know what? This exogenous estrogen that my doctor put me on, it's not working. Or I know that the side effects are not good enough, we need a better solution. And when you get 1.1 billion women all saying that, then we get to see change, which is exciting. So what does menopause feel like? Big one is hot flashes. The most common complaint at 70 to 85% of women experience hot flashes. Varying frequency, varying severity, okay? But whenever we think of menopause, we think of, oh my goodness, is it 85 degrees in here? What's happening? And then there will often be followed by a period of extreme cold, okay? That's having to do with a spike in a hormone and a dive in a hormone, okay? Those things can happen throughout this changing period. A lot of other things have to do with hot flashes. Blood sugar, okay? So if you struggle with blood sugar, likely to have much more hot flashes. If you eat a high carbohydrate, high sugar diet, gonna struggle more with hot flashes. Anxiety can play a role in this. Being overweight, smoking, coffee, even decaf coffee can increase hot flashes. So there's a lot of different things that we can do lifestyle-wise to minimize these things, okay? Heart palpitations is another one. Migraine headaches, especially if you've had migraines during your cycle, often will increase during menopause or perimenopause. Irregular, erratic periods, like I was talking about, you just think you're going to hit that 12 months and then you don't. Fibroids, this is in 40% of women will develop fibroids during perimenopause, usually before menopause. A lot of this has to do with estrogen dominance. We're going to talk a little bit about estrogen dominance later. Some of you may have heard that phrase before. During menopause or during that change, the first thing to go down is progesterone. Okay? Estrogen stays relatively high for a bit longer, and then progesterone will sink down faster. That leaves you with a relative difference, estrogen being more dominant or higher than progesterone. And estrogen, depending on the form, can be very, very inflammatory and also cause things like fibroids. And we're going to talk about good estrogens and bad estrogens in a moment. Mood swings, insomnia. Sometimes the insomnia is secondary to hot flashes, sometimes it's not. Women waking up at 3, 4 in the morning for no apparent reason every night, having a hard time getting back to sleep, all have to do with some of those changes that are happening. Fuzzy thinking, brain fog, we like to call it around here, very, very common complaint in menopause and perimenopause. Lots of other ones too, by the way. I just hit the big ones. So we're talking about estrogen here, okay? And I cannot give a talk about estrogen without talking about some exogenous estrogens or xenoestrogens. Namely, the one that I like to pick on is BPA because it's fairly well researched and we know that it's bad for us. BPA is the stuff that's in your Starbucks cup, your plastic bottles, your canned foods, and it's a toxin. It is a reproductive toxin. And it's estrogenic, so it raises that estrogen profile. It's not the exact same thing as estrogen, but it will give you the same detrimental effects of that. Okay, it's also in our water supply, mostly because of women taking a lot of birth control, taking a lot of medications. A lot of that gets excreted through the urine and then goes through. It cannot be filtered out by regular water filtration. Reverse osmosis is the only thing that can get rid of this, and that's really rare to have that in our regular water supply. CDC tested people just to see about this BPA thing. Is it a fad? What, you know, is this real? Is this a problem? 90% of people tested had it in their system. Okay, so Dr. Stacy mentioned some fertility issues that we have as a country. If this estrogen imbalance is occurring in 90% of people, it only makes sense that a woman's cycle or a woman's ability to carry full term or to become pregnant will be dependent on those estrogen levels. And if we've got a lot of this extra estrogenic material in our body, it's going to be an issue. So xenoestrogens, these are one of our bad estrogens. So our good estrogens come from foods or they're made by our body. Okay? Now, not only ovaries make estrogen, that's another misconception. Lots of other tissues in your body can make estrogen, and it does continue to do so even after menopause. So your body doesn't completely lose all ability to make estrogen. It also doesn't lose all ability if you've had a surgery to remove those parts of your body, okay? You do keep continuing to make these. These good estrogens are anti-inflammatory and anti-cancer. They're the good guys. We want these guys. The bad ones are BPA, Premarin, which is a very popular hormone replacement therapy for women after menopause. Birth control is another oftentimes hormone. Sometimes it's progesterone, sometimes it's estrogen. But these are the synthetic ones. These are the ones that are inflammatory, can be converted into cancer products. Okay? Adrenal glands. Who knows what the adrenal glands are? Raise your hand if you know. Anybody? What do your adrenal glands make? Cortisol, that's one of them. Yep, testosterone can be converted from those products. Adrenaline, right? Epinephrine, norepinephrine, the fight or flight response, that thing that helps you run from the bear, right? That's your adrenals, okay? That's a stress response. Here's our normal stress response. So you have an alarm. You're walking through the woods and you see a bear. Alarming, okay? What happens? Your adrenals start kicking out cortisol, that's the red one, and DHEA, which is what makes your sex hormones, okay? One of the ingredients for sex hormones. It rises along with your adrenaline, right? That's the whoosh that you feel, more short term. Cortisol is the one I'm more concerned with. So it rises up and it recovers, right? You run, you get away from the bear, you get in your car and you lock your doors. Okay, so it recovers, it comes right back down to a normal level. Now let's say you have a different kind of stress in your life. You have a sick relative. You have 4 children that are all under the age of 10. Right? Stress, anxiety, mood swings, okay? This part of the graph talks about abnormal response to stress. See how it goes up and then it stays up. See the cortisol, that red line? Kind of chronically high, okay? It's just hanging out there. When you go through a period of your life when you have chronic stress, physical stress, maybe you're ill, emotional stress, psychological stress, okay? That cortisol stays high. Cortisol is a bad guy. He's inflammatory. We don't want him to stay high. It also opposes estrogen. So if you have high cortisol, your estrogen is going to be in the pits, okay? It's very difficult to maintain both of those things. DHEA also makes your sex hormones. See how that takes a dive? Right? That's why a lot of women, people, okay, under high stress have very low libido. Can't make any sex hormones. Also have a hard time getting pregnant. All that's going down. So how does that have to do with menopause? Well, cortisol steals the ingredients you need to make sex hormones. So if you've got stress, anxiety, chronically, you're going to be using up all of the materials that you would normally be using to make stress hormones to make cortisol. Xenoestrogens do overload the liver, and the adrenals have to work overtime. Okay? So you're taking in a lot of BPA, you're on birth control, you're taking Premarin. That can also overload that liver, so your adrenals can't function. While the liver is busy metabolizing all your stress hormones, getting those out of your systems, estrogens hang around. And when they hang around or they get stored in your fat, they can get turned into something called a quinone, and that's cancerous. It's a carcinogen. Okay? So a lot of perimenopausal and menopausal people are stressed people. Okay? And this is why we focus a lot on adrenal stress when we treat somebody for those during that period of time. We don't just focus on estrogen and progesterone because this plays a huge role as well. So what do we do? What does medicine have to offer us? Well, hormone therapy, our Premarin. Looking at hot flashes, pretty good. 75% reduction in hot flashes. However, significant risk, mostly that carcinogenic, also very inflammatory. A lot of reasons why you wouldn't want that in your system. Sometimes they'll give antidepressants or anti-epileptics to try to resolve some of the problems. Those also have significant side effects. Phytoestrogens, these are estrogen-like molecules that attach to a different site than your regular estrogen does. So if you've got a binding site here and a binding site here, binding site A is where your endogenous estrogen would bind. The phytoestrogen binds next door, and it gives a weaker response but a safe response. Okay, so they're safe but not as effective. About 45% reduction of hot flashes for most phytoestrogens. However, we have a product here called Estrovera. Estrovera is found, it's an extract called ER-731. It's from Siberian rhubarb, and it actually has been tested to be 72% effective at reducing hot flashes. So all the benefits, or at least close to the benefits, without the side effects of, say, your hormone replacement therapy. So that's Estrovera, very, very safe. Also, you'll notice if you look at this graph, I love graphs. Here's our baseline is gray. So rating of all of these different depressed mood, anxiety, hot flashes is one of them, sleep disturbance, sexual problems, UTIs, okay, all of that goes down when you take 6 months worth of Estrovera. So your navy blue is your reduction in symptoms there. So not only treating hot flashes, which is pretty awesome. So Estrovera is a choice for a lot of women. The only problem is if you've had a sex-based cancer, a breast cancer, cervical cancer, we can't use these phytoestrogens, so you'll have to ask for other alternatives, which we do have. But some of these things aren't as safe with those women just because of their higher estrogen load anyway. What else do we have? Well, if we look functionally, sleep's a big one. Sleep reduces cortisol like crazy. Getting enough sleep is huge, okay? Reducing that cortisol. Stress reduction, taking that cortisol so it stops stealing all of your estrogen, that's a big one. Sunlight, vitamin D, okay, if you live here, you may have to supplement instead. Very anti-inflammatory, can combat some of the effects of inflammatory estrogens. Avoiding exogenous estrogens, and supplements like Estrovera. And if you have any more questions about supplements, ask one of your DBC doctors because we've got a lot of things we can work with, as well as adrenal supplements too. Doc?
I get the fun stuff. If you want to put your brain on zero while I explain this, I will not be offended. There's health professionals amongst us here that are interested in something as esoteric as methylation. I did choose methylation as a topic because its effects are profound. It is relatively new in the lingo of medicine. Being cutting edge at this office, we were probably the first to incorporate it the year that it was discovered. And by the way, if it seems rather jarring to go from this topic to that topic to that topic, it basically mirrors hormones, doesn't it? It's all over the place. And so fasten your seatbelts for this one, or just sleep for the next 5 minutes. I am going to attempt to explain to you methylation. And first, why is methylation even important? Methylation is a process of turning on or off your hormones. Kind of important, don't you think? Methylation, by the way, is responsible for turning on or off 40 other things, 40 plus other things in the body. For example, your genes. Turn them on or turn them off. If in your family there happens to be a lot of ovarian cancer, there's a genetic predisposition towards it, those genes can be turned on or they can be turned off. Neurotransmitters can be turned on or off. You want some serotonin in your brain, don't you, to be happy? You want methylation to do that. Your inflammatory system, you want it to be able to turn on or off according to whatever needs. That's your immune system, obviously. And I can go on and on what methylation does. Now, how does that really work? Well, methylation is, first of all, driven by two main B vitamins. We get these B vitamins from food, from supplementation, and even our food manufacturers often add it to our foods because they realize how important these B vitamins are. Malabsorption of B vitamins is very common. So we can get our synthetic folic acid from your corn flakes. By the way, eating the box is probably healthier than eating the cornflake. And then the natural version of that is dietary folate. That's the natural version of folic acid, folate. Notice the word foliage in there, right? We derive it from foliage. That gets converted via enzymatic pathways to tetrahydrofolate, eventually 5,10-methanol tetrahydrofolate. And then we need this special little enzyme to convert it to the active form that we use in methylation. And that's the methotetrahydrate folate reductase enzyme. The MTHFR enzyme, yes, thank you. We have a few sleepers already, it's working. The MTHFR enzyme is deficient in about 40% of women of Northwest European descent. It is a very common genetic defect, if you want to call it that. Other 60% of women can develop problems with the MTHFR enzyme due to excessive stress, malnourishment, etc., etc. When we do the new patient exam or reevaluation, you can see hints of this problem, this lack of enzyme, by just the geography of the tongue. And there's other genetic traits as well. So that, if you're missing that or there's a defect there, you are not converting to the active form of folate called methylfolate. That's why there's a product in Nature's Remedies called Methyl B. It's to make sure we bypass that because some people just don't have that enzyme. So you combined this methylfolate with vitamin B12. Most of you have heard of B12. It's got a long history of use. That's called methylcobalamin. And you combine those to make something called SAMe for short. S-adenyl methionine. That's what that stands for. You see that little green thing on top of that SAM molecule? That is a methyl group. Yes, this is biochemistry, folks. A methyl group is a carbon with 3 hydrogens attached to it. That is a methyl group, and this is a critical component within methylation. I promise you I'll sum it up later. This is what we call a methyl donor. Remember that one, methyl donor. Are we kind of good so far? So what happens? 1, we consume food. Out of that, we extract amino acids and the methylfolate, the B vitamins that we're talking about, right? Methylfolate, methylcobalamin. Out of that, we make that SAM molecule, as I explained earlier, which has that methyl donor attached to it. It goes around the cycle within your cells, and that methyl donor is out there to make somebody else happy. And it will attach to another amino acid that's found, for instance, within your DNA. And when it does, whap, it can turn a gene on as it's needed. Or it can combine to an amino acid and make a neurotransmitter. So it can really affect your intellect and moods. And it can turn on an inactive estrogen and make it estrogenic. And it can also turn on the ways to break down the estrogen, and yes, the testosterone and progesterone, and make it bounce between active and inactive forms. And this is happening constantly, every millisecond, according to changing needs of you. So when SAM has donated, has done its good deed and given the methyl group to activate, to let the lights turn on somewhere, it gets down converted to another component called homocysteine. We can measure homocysteine. So I often get, Doc, which lab should I get pulled? You can order labs through our website or through however you want to do it. I almost always call for homocysteine. And most doctors are like, why would you want to do that? I am measuring how well you're methylating. Because if homocysteine is off, then I know your methylation is off. And I know the lights are not being turned on and off in your body like they should be. Does that make sense? It's a critical component. We have some research now to suggest that homocysteine can even predict cardiovascular disease better than any other test that we have. because it affects how we repair the arteries. Again, it's turning things on, turning things off, inflammation. Now, homocysteine can be converted to glutathione. I'm sorry. I am. But glutathione is the one other word that I really want you to remember, because glutathione is your main master detoxifying molecule. This is how you get rid of spent estrogens. And if your glutathione, your detoxifying molecule, is not working well, you are not getting rid of your estrogens, and you are having hot flashes, as well as other undesirable things. Glutathione can be depleted by having a filthy environment that it works in. McDonald's, pesticides, stresses such as even physical injuries or overtraining. So when glutathione gets depleted, your hormones are going to become very imbalanced, but you're also going to be affecting the homocysteine, which is that methylation pathway, and you start scavenging B vitamins. This is why the B vitamin malabsorption syndrome is so common in the 21st century, because we are abusing our glutathione levels with the pesticides, the man-made foods, the stresses we're under, and it's making this methylation thing spin out of control. It can't get enough fuel, and we become folic acid deficient and B12 deficient. Schizophrenia. I know I'm diverging just for a moment, but back in the 50s we already knew that if we supplemented with some of these vitamins at about 1 to 10,000 times the RDA, you could cure schizophrenia in 6 weeks. We had no idea how that worked, except now we know it works through this pathway, which then affects neurotransmitters. I can guarantee you that there were some happy hormonal people under that therapy as well, because I'm sure it would affect the hormones positively at the same time, as it did their immune system, as it did their cardiovascular risk. And this is the main way that we can prevent cancer. So that little quote that I started with that my son sent me, this is one of the primary ways, mark my word, that they will say, we'll prevent all cancers that are out there. So that's methylation. So again, what's methylation in short? It's the turning on and off of our hormones. B vitamins are used to do this. Some of us can't absorb B vitamins because we've got this defect called MTHFR defect. It affects about 40% of women. And therefore, when we present you with folic acid, we do it in that precursor form which can bypass that enzyme, and that's called methyl B or 5-tetrahydrofolate. We also have that in intrinsic B12 folate, so that's both of those together, or another product called Vessel Care. And why would we have different ones? It's because different women have different vitamin B needs, and sometimes, honestly, it's a little bit experimental. We overdo this thing or underdo this thing, so then we back off or try another product. There are genetic ways to check for this. We have 21 different genes that we can test for. It costs thousands and thousands of dollars, and every 6 months or so it's changing radically. I haven't jumped on that bandwagon, because why waste the patient's money on something that will probably change dramatically in 6 to 12 months from now again, and then I have to change the protocol. So I'd rather go with the seat of the pants a little bit until we are getting better at this. Phew. So let's go to something just a little lighter. The female athlete. Special needs, often ignored, and I don't like it. So we're going to unload some information on you that we need to know about the female athletes. Their needs are different than guys. Yeah, some things obviously are the same. I'm going to focus on the differences. The differences are, one, the female athlete needs a different ratio of carbs to proteins. Okay, we got the strength and power athletes, team sports and endurance athletes. The strength and power athletes are very weightlifting involved kind of sport. We're talking anything from discus to shot put to javelin, and all those power sports, and that would also include things like the long jump and such. I would also include sprinters, the 100 and 200 meter sprinters in that, because a lot of muscle mass is required for sports like that. And post-workout ratio, and we're talking within a half hour of the workout, You want 2 to 1 carb to protein. Team sports, so we're talking soccer here and such. Is there any other game? 3 to 1. And 4 to 1, the endurance athletes, so we're talking track, cross country, that kind of thing. And there's a big controversy always on how much protein do you need. Folks, the quality is absolutely critical. The whey proteins are really filthy. They are hormone changing, the main cause of insulin resistance, probably the number 2 leading cause of diabetes. So whey protein is not what we often do. So I will talk about protein quality a little bit more, but it's at 0.25 to 0.5 grams to kilograms of body weight. So if you're 100 kilograms, which is 220 pounds, you'd be talking at least 25 to 50 grams of protein. Sports recovery drinks, we are pounded by information for fuels that are out there that are basically illegal in Europe. It seems like they're about 20 years ahead of us when it comes to making sure that people don't get what their body doesn't deserve. Example, hormone replacement therapy, they kicked it out about 20 years before we did. We had to wait till our patents ran out and before we said, maybe this doesn't work so well. Little cynicism there if you didn't catch it. It should have electrolytes, sodium, chloride, potassium, magnesium. And these are really critical. You can read up on them a little bit more later. The magnesium has to be magnesium glycinate. That's critical. All the other magnesiums, oxalate or citrate, are difficult to absorb, will upset the gut, and when you're in athletic competition, that's not what you want. So it's got to be magnesium glycinate. The taurine helps regulate water, mineral salt levels in the blood. Amazing what a difference that one makes for hydration. L-carnosine, really, that one helps you recover faster. If there's enough L-carnosine in there, you can reduce stiffness the next day by up to 50%. B complex drives methylation, right? And chromium affects how sugar reaches the muscle. And citric acid, again, has to do with our hydration. It has to be in the sports rehydration drink, and it should also contain glucose and fructose. There's controversy, well, you shouldn't have fructose, or no, you shouldn't have glucose. It's critical we have both in there. There's so much research on that. Tour de France is where most of our research came from initially, and it found that if you have glucose and fructose in the sports drink, the added extra boost at the end of the stage, so we're talking at mile 150 after mountains, they could go another 10% longer distance if the sports rehydration drink had glucose and fructose versus one versus the other. Okay, so it's also very interesting to note that if you have a combination of glucose and fructose in the mouth, you're not even ingesting it, you get an immediate burst of energy to the muscles that lasts about 10 minutes. So if the female athlete has to do soccer and it's going into overtime, so they need that extra one that goes up and above and beyond what they trained for, it's important to have some of that sports rehydration drink in the mouth while you play, and you will get that extra energy. Research showed that about 1.5 years ago. Very fascinating. Again, recovery is greatly enhanced by actually ingesting it, not just holding it in the mouth. And what you don't want is all the food colors and high fructose corn syrup, lack of electrolytes. All your, well, I'm not even going to start naming names. So what we utilize is something called Endura. It has all the real things in it. It's got the magnesium, it's got the citric acid, taurine, malic acid, L-carnosine, and it's got the fructose in it. So it's a very carefully thought out and tested, clinically trialed product. It's called Endura, tastes good, is very inexpensive. And the newest one that follows that one up is called Mito 5, and that has added ingredients beyond this that actually enhances mitochondrial function, which is the energy powerhouse of the muscles, to decrease mitochondrial fatigue, which is so common with the overtrained athlete. I want to jump quickly to the ACL ligament injuries, because in the females, there's some research that suggests it's about 10 times as high of females to males, and others say it's 4 to 6 times. In either case, the female athletes tear the ACLs like there's no tomorrow, and it is so preventable. So I wanted to cover that one. It's basically, the question is why, and it's because their quads are more dominant in general with females versus males, and they have decreased neuromuscular performance. And really, what does that mean? It means that the reflexes from the nerve to the muscle isn't quite as quick as it is in a male, and that's due to hormonal differences. So the reflexes aren't quite as quick to correct for things, and that is due to, again, the hormonal imbalance. And then anatomists have found that there's a little less space for the ACL, so there's a little more chafing going on in chronic running, bicycling, things like that. The wider pelvis that women generally have also increases what we call the Q angle, and that's where, and I'm exaggerating here, of course, is where the leg goes in and then out a little bit. Does that make sense? Which, sorry, but a little demonstrative. And even a change of as little as 2 to 3 degrees of male versus female increases pressure on the ACL dramatically. And again, I talked about that slower reflex time. So that's what sets you up for ACL injuries. And the prevention of ACL injuries is really to teach proper landing technique. And so whenever there's landing involved, instead of landing with the knees falling forward, you have to teach to land more straight up and down. That protects the ACL dramatically. Engage in knee and hip flexion during lateral cutting. So whenever we're going to the side, make sure the knee and hips are flexed at the same angle. And that is why a female soccer player should look lower than a male. A male tends to be up higher. A female, you watch them, the really good ones, they're down here. They're protecting ACLs, and it just works better with slightly wider hips, and they're more agile that way also. So this is some fascinating science behind it. A lot of very good athletes do this naturally, but the ones that don't need to be taught this. Also, proper deceleration techniques. So when you're coming in from running, you're slowing down. You do not, as a woman, slow down on your toes. That is the worst thing you can do for your ACL, because that puts the force on it that it doesn't like. Instead, you should, I'm going to exaggerate here, slow down using your heels. There's a big difference, and the classic way for an ACL to tear is to come down from bumps while skiing. Again, you're on your toes like you're theoretically supposed to be, and that's how we tear. It hates that kind of motion. So you want to decelerate on the heels more. Again, I'm exaggerating. And with training techniques, the dynamic neuromuscular skeletal proprioceptive, really what that means is functional exercise. So working with a ball, working with free weights, it's all motion kind of exercise. Yoga, Pilates, and strength training that uses free weights is the way to do it. Plyometrics, agility drills, core stability. Our favorite is oftentimes doing planks and on the ball, one of those big balls, and really focus on the hamstrings, gluteus medius, and hip abductor strength. So whatever exercises focuses on that. One other common factor among female athletes is bone loss, because most of it is accrued while we're growing up. And in high school athletes, and what we meant with high school athletes are those that just really compete in team sports and an individual sport. That's what was considered a high school athlete. About 22% of them had decreased bone mass, which that's more than a fifth, folks. And 18 to 41% had eating disorders. So we're talking just an epidemic of problems, which of course then leads to menstrual abnormalities, which more than half of female athletes had in high school already. 65% in college, and then in elite athletes. And this problem is something that all of us docs see as adults. A woman comes in with any kind of hormonal issue, and you go back into their previous history, and here it is. This is where it started. And why would that be? It's really because there's these impossible demands being placed on the female athlete, and that is, I got to be skinny, I have to have a social life, and I have to perform like mad. And it is a totally unfair combination, because they need to eat according to their needs, they need to get their sleep, and they need to not overstress their adrenals. If they just go wrong on any one of those things, then the adrenal says, bah, and it stops producing the the estrogens and progesterones and testosterones like it should, you get amenorrhea, or lack of menstruation, or highly abnormal menstruation, and you're setting yourself up for bone loss and really a world of hurt really down the line. So a female athlete has to get those protein needs. They have to get the good fats in, and they cannot ever starve themselves. And if it means that they are going to be a little bit more muscular, so be it. A woman cannot get huge muscles. What you see in those muscle magazines is artificially pumped, testosterone driven, who knows what they were taking kind of muscles. Women, when they become muscular, gain muscle mass to some degree, but it's mostly just definition. So we have to keep on reassuring the female athlete, don't worry about it, you're not going to get large. Just eat that protein because your body will use it for repair, not to get larger. So it's an absolute critical point, and their fat requirements are double to the non-athletes. So again, the backbone of hormones is fats. We need to really hit the fats with the female athlete. Iron deficiency is very common with them, and I should I require all my female athletes get a CBC done to check for the iron levels. So the female athlete is a unique one. It's a big topic, and it's something that needs our full out support as far as making sure they make it through safely. So the whole picture, where do you start? This truly is functional medicine, hormones is, because everything has a huge impact on it. Exercise is critical for stress reduction, for maintaining muscle mass, which is a big organ that regulates hormones as well. Food used as medicine and nutraceuticals is obvious. The Estrovera that was mentioned by Dr. Kate will rival hormone replacement therapy. We have arrived at the era that phytonutrients can rival drugs pretty much any day without the side effects and have tons of clinical trials behind it. That product alone has had clinical trials in 63 different 63 different clinics in Europe alone before it was approved. So there's a lot of research behind a lot of this stuff. We do acoustic compressions, for example, for cysts within the ovaries, like PCOS. Acoustic compression helps normalize inflammation in those areas. We do it for adrenal fatigue to increase circulation to the area. And it is absolutely amazing chiropractic health. Dr. Kate, actually Dr. Stacy mentioned pregnancy and went eloquently on about pregnancy and the importance thereof. Just the adjustments alone, Dr. Stacy provides a very critical element in the health for the little baby as well as mom. Did you know that regular adjustments reduces pain during childbirth by at least 50%? It makes it go so much easier. No C-sections for our patients. Yeah? And not only that, if we can monitor the mom and keep her well neurologically and go through those biomechanical alterations without developing the little mommy slump afterwards, right? It's what a gift are you giving to health. So the chiropractic component is very important as well. Lifestyle coaching is an important piece because we have so much information to share, and that's we feel so privileged that you come to these seminars so we can disseminate some of that. So thank you. But some of that also gets disseminated in our by our health coaches because some topics just need extra attention. Detoxification is critical. 50% of all gallbladder removals gets done during that perimenopause time only. 50%, so just in those 2 years, more than half of all gallbladder surgeries. Why would that be? It's because our estrogens gets dumped out via the gallbladder, out of the liver, right? And if you have abnormal problems, abnormal estrogens, then you're going to have gallbladder problems. So keeping your liver up and rolling can really help elements like that as well. Community is so critical as well. I love recommending for my patients girl time. I'm talking to my female patients now. So that definitely came out wrong. So But girl time is so critical. It is therapeutic. Cortisol levels go lower, and it is critical component of hormonal health to have girl time. And doctor support, you'd hope that you have a doctor that somewhat listens to you and doesn't just grunt and look in your general direction, but actually listens and then incorporates that into the therapy that you need. So that does not sum up hormones at all. So that's why we have hormones number 2. And we're going to cover things like precocious puberty. It is unbelievable. The new definition for precocious puberty, I believe, is age 7? Is it 8? Okay, so it's 8. They've just redefined it. I mean, isn't that just unbelievable? It is just unbelievable what's happening out there. So we're going to discuss that. What is happening to the young girls that are out there, and the abnormal periods that we are getting, the PMS, the bone health. And I'd like to also add to that, we're going to be talking about how hormones affect communication between the male and the female. To be continued. So that's Monday, December 2. And I so appreciate you coming here and pretending to be humored by us. Thank you. And I hope you got some information to use. And we are opening it up to hormonal questions wherever you may have them.